This particular story of Jesus rubs so many people wrong. I suspect that has something to do with how many of us instinctively identify with Martha. Martha is stressed. In the ancient world, nothing was more important than hospitality. It's a moral obligation to provide well for your guests. And Martha here is hosting dinner for 13 with Jesus himself at the table. If this doesn't go well, Martha will bear the shame forever. She'll bring shame on her entire village. She'll have let God himself down. No pressure or anything. So far, 2 plates have gotten broken. The fish is overcooked. The souffles don't seem to be rising. Both water and wine are running low. A real double bind. A kitchen towel catches fire. Martha runs to put it out and accidentally knocks the whole tray of salmon onto the floor. And at that moment, Martha looks through the doorway and spots her sister Mary sitting between James and Thomas in the living room, smiling sweetly up at Jesus in a dress that isn't stained with sweat, or presumably stinking like fish juice. Martha snaps. She'd kill to be in that room with Jesus. But somebody's got to cook this dinner, darn it. She asks for a private word with Jesus and then pulls him outside to give him an earful about the injustice of being left alone to do all the work. She says, Jesus, why don't you tell my sister to stop yucking it up in there with you and the boys and come and do her duty helping me in the kitchen? And Jesus' response is probably not what Martha is either hoping for or expecting. Dear Martha, Jesus says, you're anxious and upset over so many things, but only one thing is necessary. And Mary has figured that out. Only one thing is necessary? What does that even mean? Is Jesus talking about the wine? Hopefully he doesn't mean the salmon. This story has always been a burr in the saddle of oldest children and the 10% of people who do 90% of the labor on group projects. Does Jesus get that somebody has to do the work? Somebody has to take responsibility. It also comes off as kind of offensive to people who feel better equipped to serve with their hands than to spend all day in a classroom debating the nature of free will. And James and John might be great thinkers and all, but they wouldn't last 3 days without someone who knows how to bake them bread and unclog their toilet. Even in the context of Luke, the conversation between Martha and Jesus feels a little odd. After all, the very last thing we heard Jesus say was the story of the Good Samaritan. The whole point of that story was taking responsibility for people in ditches with needs. If that's what God wants, there are probably 1,000 necessary things to do. And Jesus has said it's all about love. Love of God and love of neighbor. But not everyone is prone to the same kinds of mistakes. Some people don't get around to loving because they're too busy writing theology papers or eating shredded cheese out of the bag while scrolling on their phones. Other people, like Martha, veer toward the opposite error. The potential for love is totally squashed by performance anxiety and constant frantic overfunctioning. Why is Martha so stressed out? Well, for 2 reasons probably. One is the conviction that if she doesn't do it, keep this whole mission on track, nobody will. And the other is the secret suspicion that if she stopped being helpful enough, Jesus might not even want her around. Martha is deeply wrong on both counts. First, let's talk about what really needs to get done. Yes, there are a whole lot of people to love, and there's a whole lot of work to do if every part of the world is going to be freed and set right like God desires. But the idea that God has no hands or feet but Martha's simply isn't true. God has Jesus' hands and feet, and Thomas's, and an army of angels on call. And God's own spirit, God's presence, is very active in the world. For goodness sake, Martha, Jesus recently fed over 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He and his followers aren't going to starve because you burned a dish. God's rescue plan for this world doesn't depend on you never needing sleep or never taking a coffee break. And second, let's talk about why Jesus is in this house at all. There are plenty of places he could get a meal. Jesus is here because he loves Martha and Mary. He considers them friends. He's here to spend time with them. The irony is that Martha is so busy performing for Jesus, she isn't giving him the one thing that he wants most. The one thing no one else can give him. Martha's presence, her attention, her company. Jesus isn't telling Martha that he doesn't value cooks. He's telling her that he doesn't take slaves. She's more to him than a meal ticket. She's more than the number of plates she can juggle without dropping any. Jesus is here for Martha. Not just for her souffles, not just for what she can do for him. Only one thing is necessary: love. And love isn't a matter of maximizing labor. It's about giving and receiving. working and resting, serving and listening. Sometimes love means sweating it out in the kitchen, and sometimes love means sipping a drink beside Jesus and letting him worry about the fish. Let's read the story in Luke 10, verses 38 to 42. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed them into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits there while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me." But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you're worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her." I'm Megan Larissa Good, and this has been Reading Jesus. Thanks so much for joining me for a few minutes in Luke, and I'll see you next time.